It was a night of paralysing terror. But also great heroism. Survivors relieve the Zeebrugge ferry disaster 30 years after 193 passengers were killed within 60 seconds of leaving a Belgian port. It was a disaster that shocked the nation and went down as one of the worst maritime disasters in British history, but which also saw amazing acts of heroism. Tomorrow marks the 30th anniversary of the sinking of the Herald of Free Enterprise ferry, which occurred moments after it left the Belgian port Zeebrugge and killed 193 people. The vessel, which carried both cars and passengers, began to capsize just 60 seconds after leaving the port due to its bow doors being open, allowing water to pour in. Incredible acts of bravery by crew and passengers led to the majority of those on board surviving, but more than 150 passengers and nearly 40 crew died. A number of the disaster's heroes received awards, including a George Medal for ex-policeman Andrew Parker, who became known as the Human Bridge after he laid across a broken walkway and allowed passengers including his wife and daughter to cross over his body to safety. Head waiter Michael Skippen received a posthumous George Medal. He died after saving others and calling for calm. Other crew members were awarded the Queen's Gallantry Medal. One survivor has spoken of the sheer paralysing terror of that night and his fear that he was going to die. Simon Osborne, of Leicestershire, was in sixth form at the time of the incident and had been on a trip to Belgium with school friends. He told the Express the Herald was struck by a violent jolt before almost instantaneously capsizing. Mr. Osborne, a married father of 4, told the paper, "One man cried out as he crashed through a glass panel just feet from where I stood, rooted to the spot, wide-eyed, frozen in fear. A split second later we were plunged into darkness as the lights failed and I was instantly swept up by the swirling wave of freezing water which had crashed through the ship's doors and windows." Mr. Osborne said he realized he had a chance of survival when the water level stopped rising but could only hear the cries of terror from other passengers became deafening. He described his eventual rescue as a harrowing scene, forcing himself through dead bodies and wreckage to find help. Mr. Osborne, who lost 2 19-year-old friends in the disaster, told the Express, "It was like trying to swim through a rubbish dump. I was exhausted but I was spotted by a frogman who put a rope harness under my arms and I was winched to safety." Townsend Thureson, which later became P&O European Ferries, was severely criticized in a public inquiry report published later in 1987. Lord Justice Sheen, who conducted the inquiry, said the company had been infected with the disease of sloppiness from the top down. The inquiry confirmed the ferry had left the harbor with its bow doors open, allowing water to flood the car deck. It was also established that the crew member responsible for closing the doors was asleep at the time. An inquest jury returned verdicts of unlawful killing in October 1987. P&O European Ferries was later charged with corporate manslaughter and 7 employees were charged with manslaughter. In September 1990, an Old Bailey trial began but a month later the case collapsed after the judge directed the jury to acquit the defendants. The case was often cited during attempts by the government to get a corporate manslaughter bill through Parliament. The Corporate Manslaughter and Corporate Homicide Act 2007 was finally introduced across the UK in April 2008. Before then, it was possible for a company to be prosecuted for a wide range of criminal offences, including the common law offence of gross negligence manslaughter. But for the company to be guilty of the offence, it was also necessary for a senior figure who could be said to embody the company to be guilty as well. The offence was created to provide accountability for serious management failings across an organization, and to overcome the problems at common law of identification. The disaster also led to a far-reaching tightening of international ferry safety regulations, including new design standards for all ferries using UK ports. Logging details on the number of travelers on board ships for search and rescue purposes were among other measures enforced. Ships were also required to record the name, age, and sex of passengers following confusion about those on board the Herald of Free Enterprise. The UK has done more than most countries to raise ferry safety standards, and tougher stability and survivability measures for ferries using British ports were introduced. There were further rule changes when the ferry Estonia capsized in a severe storm in the North Baltic Sea in September 1994 with the loss of more than 900 lives. UK operators of roll-on, roll-off ferries were required to be able to cope with 50 centimeters of water entering the car deck. The incident caused the highest death count of any peacetime maritime disaster involving a British ship since the sinking of HMY Isle on January 1, 1919 near Stornoway, Isle of Lewis, where at least 205 perished of the 280 aboard. The Zeebrugge disaster was just one of a series of tragedies, mostly in the transport sector, which scarred the late 1980s. The year of 1985 had seen three terrible incidents: the Bradford City Football Club fire, the European Cup final Heysel Stadium disaster in Brussels, and the Manchester Airport plane fire. The Herald disaster was followed by other 1987 tragedies including the King's Cross Underground fire and the Enniskillen Poppy Day massacre. The period from December 1988 to August 1989 saw the Clapham rail crash, the Lockerbie air disaster, the Kegworth air crash, the Hillsborough Stadium disaster and the Thames River boat Marchiona sinking.